I'm Cindy Loza, Managing Editor of Member Content for the Path to Purchase Institute. Retail media continues to be such an evolving and complex space, and its influence and momentum in the commerce marketing world will only continue to grow. This is why I'm so excited to have two wonderful experts in this space with me today, ready to discuss some of the unique nuances, opportunities, and challenges of retail media. Joining me today is Kroger Precision Marketing's Jenny Holleran and Threefold Justin Sparks. Justin, Jenny, thank you so much for being with me today. Can you tell us a bit about your companies and your roles?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. So Jenny Holleran with Kroger Precision Marketing. I am a group director here, and I work with brands in the way that they engage with customers through data-driven advertising.
Justin Sparks. I'm VP of Business Development and Partnerships here at Threefold. We are a white label operations agency that helps run retail media networks.
Great. Well, thanks again to both of you for joining me today. Just diving in, Jenny, you're no stranger to PPI. You've spoken at our conference in May, for example, and rightfully so, received a Retail Media Award last year. I wanted to ask you about something that you've said on stage at our events about how retail media needs to be looked at as both a channel and a layer. Can you expand on that?
Yes. Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that. I love this question. It is something that has been fantastic to watch the evolution. So I've been with KPM since we launched 7 years ago. And when we started, we were really focused on driving media between brands and Kroger, obviously hitting close with owned and operated, think paid search and display on site. And as we've continued to grow, you realize the benefit of shopper insights that we have real time. So you're able to use that data in a layer in the programmatic ecosystem. So you still have that retail media channel where we think of Kroger Precision Marketing, Kroger brand owned and operated, really being able to engage with that Kroger logo and the loyalty that exists there. But having that data layer is allowing national brands to utilize those signals, that real-time shopper insights, to really hit home. Think of when a brand is launching a new product. We know if you have a flavor profile, as an example, I do not like spicy food, but my colleague loves it. So that would be a wasted impression on me, as I would not convert on something that is new for spice. We also know that it reduces ad waste, which is really exciting as you think about that data layer. So in a study against third-party advertising, we know that we can deliver the same results with half the impressions. So there's absolutely still a place for that retail media channel, but we've seen huge expansion in how companies are utilizing that data layer as well.
Great. Justin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly, I totally agree with Jenny, and we were talking in prep. I was really curious to hear your answer, Jenny, in terms of the difference between channel and layer. But I think, Jenny's absolutely right in the sense that the data now that's coming out of the walls of the RMNs as they start to plug into offsite capabilities really enables brands to leverage the power of the retail media networks and their data across a number of different facets. And I think ultimately where we'll get to as an industry is it's no longer probably a channel alone, right? It's just media. And I think we're headed in that direction, but this is kind of the in-between stage as we start to mature as a retail media industry.
Great. And what are some of the specific challenges and opportunities in retail media right now? Justin, we'll stick with you on this one.
Sure. So I think I'll go back to that. I think right now we are very much still leading as we are retail first and not media first in a lot of cases. And in a lot of cases, rightfully so, right? I mean, the value of being a supplier or a brand that's joining to these retail media networks is that you have accountability and attribution to sales and direct attribution and close loop measurement. So obviously that is what the retailer should be building around. But I think as we get into the conversation today, and these networks kind of mature from a media perspective in terms of just different touch points, retail media really kind of started with retail search, responsive products and sponsored listings. That's my background as well. And so, I think as we start to get into CTV and digital out of home and kind of all these other traditional media channels, that's the kind of biggest challenge that the industry is facing is how do you start to act like a true media company and make sure that, which I would say the second piece in challenge and opportunity for the industry, and bring that standardization. So when you're starting to go after national media budgets, they work in a very different way than maybe the shopper teams work in traditionally the networks have sold into. And so you have to be able to make sure that you're adapting your model to the kind of expectations of a media buyer and media planner from a national media team. So I would say those two is kind of transitioning from retail to media, but then also as part of that, or maybe a subsequent leg to that is standardization, which is obviously a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, I'm so glad you hit on standardization because you really can't spark industry-wide change without standardization. We at KPM have worked closely with the IAB on their retail media measurement standards. Today, this is really about standardizing that measurement for retailers, but ultimately we need to change media measurement expectations of the whole ecosystem. So I'm so glad you said that because absolutely. I think the other opportunity is the biggest threat to all digital advertising is maintaining the status quo. We've already, like 4 or 5 minutes in, started talking about the evolution just over the last few years. So the old way of optimizing towards cheap impressions has really created a terrible experience for both buyers and customers. So retailers are in an excellent position to make the entire digital ecosystem better. We have sales data that can prove performance. So with that standardization, but it's not only on our sites, but on other platforms as well.
Great. Now, some retailer media networks and their offerings have really matured and definitely evolved these past few years. Do you think brands are embracing retail media as a full funnel play now?
Yeah, I think yes. Short answer, yes. But obviously it's a spectrum. So some more than others. We've seen really great success when brands lean into that full funnel approach, threading their media all the way from the highest level of awareness through to conversion. We do have to remember that every touch point matters, and consistency across messaging and audiences is really key to driving success. But yes, absolutely.
I would say that maybe I have a bit of a different opinion there. Besides
Here we
devil's
go.
advocate.
Now's the conflict.
And I think I think broadly, no. I think the brands and the retail media networks that are on the frontier, which includes Kroger and that, are getting there with the more sophisticated brands. But I think what I hear in the market is a lot of brands are still just trying to figure out where do they spend the dollars across a number of retail media networks. And then how do they bring that into kind of the above the line and some of the brand building components and different tactics that they have is kind of secondary. And so I think that is a challenge that we have to face as an industry as we've had, I think the number is like 200 plus retail media networks. And Jenny, you're in the grocery space, so a lot of those are grocers. So I think that to me is we're seeing it, yes. I think with the more sophisticated brands and at the top of the market, but I wouldn't say that it's become endemic across really the industry as a whole. But it's starting to kind of stall.
How can the relationship with RMNs and brands be improved to continue to grow the retail media space?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think part of what makes retail media so special is truly the deep relationship we have with our advertisers. So unlike traditional media publishers, retailers actually have a vested interest in the success of those campaigns. We want to sell their granola bars, their ice cream, toothpaste, pet food, energy drinks just as much as they do. Their success is our success. So we really do have strong relationships. We had a recent regression analysis by our team that showed every dollar invested in on-site retail advertising correlated to $14 of total store sales. So again, that is driving that brand success and the retailer success at the same time. With that kind of impact, brands are certainly evolving their go-to-market. But as Justin just mentioned, it's really complex. So some brands are a little bit more sophisticated than others. One of the most common questions I tend to get when out in market is, who's doing it best? Which organization is structured properly for retail media? Where do I invest that first dollar? Which one is exciting to me because I think we're all in it together and we're all learning. So you have to look across the organization all the way from the CFO, the brand marketer, the omni team, the e-com team, and recognize they have different objectives and incentives. And how do you marry those together? And and understanding the job to be done. So I think that's still how we're trying to break down those silos today as you get above the line and below the line as well.
I completely agree with Jenny. I mean, I think the first piece is just getting the right people in the room, and I think that's a really easy thing to say. It's much harder to do in the sense that you want the merchant, you want the retail media network, you want the brand and their agency all in the same room. So that way you can decision that are based off of what's best for both sides, right? And I think the smarter brands and networks are doing that today, and they're finding ways to make sure that is kind of a two-way conversation or a three-way conversation, depending on the number of parties. But I think your other point around choice is really interesting, and I liked what you commented on in terms of org structure. I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about with some of the other questions is, and I've already mentioned, is like there's so much choice out there, right? And so for the brands, who are you going to spend with? Well, money follows easy. And so if you can find a way to make it easy for the brands to, in the buy side, to understand how do they get access to your inventory or data? How does it perform? What are the insights that come from that? Not just from a media perspective, but again, your retailers, and you can show them what it means for their merchandising programs. Those are the folks who are going to win and have outsized opportunity in the marketplace. And I think, the other piece that I would say, which I hear more often than not, is that a lot of times the retailers who are bringing in the brands and the agencies to product conversations as they start to build their capabilities are also the ones that stay at the frontier or can catch up. And I think that's the other piece where money falls easy, but they also are opinionated, right? And so they know how different systems work. They're logging into multiple different networks, and they'll tell you kind of where you are. Are you at parity, or are you ahead or behind? And I think it's really important to make sure that you're having that dialogue in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think I love what you said, money follows easy, but I think also money follows where you get that performance. So with there being 200 plus, whatever our number is today, we should have looked it up before hopping on retail media networks. We also have to think about what matters, like being in the grocery space. We're America's grocer. If a CPG wins with Kroger and a few other retailers, they've made their year. They don't have to invest across 200 retail media networks in order to deliver their sales goals. So where are they thinking about where they sell the most product and really where they're driving most of their sales, and how can you invest in those spaces?
Great. Thanks to both of you. Now, for the next question, how do retailers build more value through sales and category growth in retail media and avoid being a quote unquote tax on merchandising operations? Justin, we'll start with you on this one.
Keep it short, because Jenny, I mean, given your advantage point, I'm really interested in your perspective here as well. But I go back to leading with the R, right? In retail media, or RMNs, right? Lead with retail. So you just kind of touched on it, right? Which is ultimately, how can you show that you are driving both not only incremental sales, not necessarily incremental ROAS. I think we kind of get too focused on that as an industry. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, Jenny, but I think that's the piece there that you as a network can really stand out, is how are you growing the category and how are you growing that brand sales? Because ultimately, if you're doing those two things, the money will follow on the back end. So don't forget that you're a retailer first and the merchandising organization first, and you have that inherent insight into how that activity is performing.
Yes, I can't wait till we dive into a little bit of measurement and metrics and all of that. But yeah, being a tax, I think planning needs to be a win-win for the consumer. So you think about, we often say at Kroger Precision Marketing, retail media is media, which I know is a polarizing statement. Some brands are like, yes, it is, and some are not. But really what we mean by that is media should stand on its own merits as a media investment. So no brand should feel strong-armed. The media performance should speak for itself. So yes, let's land on the appropriate KPIs, obviously, but let's make sure that it's really the performance that's driving it and not the merchants as a tax.
Speaking of the appropriate KPIs, How can RMNs innovate to build long-term brand equity beyond short-term goals like ROI and ROAS?
You want me to just keep, yeah, I'll roll right into this.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, the short-term metrics are typically driven at the bottom of the funnel. We know that. That's also how a lot of retail media started. We already established that, but don't be mistaken. Those are really important. We know that retail media has a huge impact beyond the short term. So short-term actions in e-commerce shape the long-term success. E-commerce shopping becoming routine. How do you buy something again or have that regular purchase? That all starts with some of those smaller, short-term buys at the bottom. So how are you looking at short-term and long-term, and how is that breaking through? We also drive a lot of long-term value offsite. So again, as we've expanded off of owned and operated into offsite channels, precision purchase signals unlock a myriad of ways for brands to deliver more relevant messages to their consumers. And we know that that relevancy drives greater lifetime value. So on average, we know that precision audiences drive a 40% higher lifetime value than traditional audiences on demo. That is changing the industry. That's really saying, hey, we know what we used to do, but now we're driving long-term value. And did it have, I think, that incremental lift immediately? Maybe, maybe not. But let's not look at just one metric.
You stole part of my answer, Jenny, which was
I was
how do you look at lifetime value? So, I think that's the other piece, right? Is like, to your point, like there's a lot of focus on just what I would say is, campaign metrics or short-term metrics of, how is the media performing, but how does that actually influence your business? And I think for me, the other piece is the consumer doesn't only interact at a single retailer. And so I think this is where, as you look at, especially our larger CPG brands in the industry where they're spending across a number of retailers, like I think as an industry, we need to start to move towards how do we stitch together measurement across a number of RMNs, because I think we are at risk of getting more kind of walled gardens in place. And I think that is detrimental, really, to the health of the industry overall. And so I think that's the other piece for me is looking at kind of that long-term values. The RMNs have an opportunity because largely they're competing with Amazon, and everyone rises if they can find ways to service those brands and take money from the Amazon pockets or potentially even Google. But I think the other piece is I'll go back to as we look at growth in the media side of retail media networks, and Jenny touched on it in terms of the precision signals that they're sending out into an offsite environment. It's forecasted that 60 to 70% of every new dollar that comes into retail media is coming from national funds over the next 2 years. And so it's really important that we, as an industry, start to seize on that opportunity and show value beyond just kind of the campaign metrics, but also I would challenge the retailers to think beyond their own walls as well.
Thinking more long term, how can retailers convince brands that investment is worthwhile beyond an immediate sales increase and as a tool to build consumer loyalty? Justin, do you want to expand? I know you were touching on this a bit.
Yeah, sure. So, I think I'll go back to that last kind of data point I just mentioned, which is 60 to 70% of new dollars coming into the retail media ecosystem are expected to be, and this is from a BCG study that was done about a year and a half ago, that are expected to be from the national branding bucket, right? So not dollars that are already committed to these retailers, and the retailers are just kind of optimizing across the programs to yield as strong of a performance as they can. They're new, they're growing the pie. And so I think the other thing, Jenny, that you hit on before, which I had written down just kind of in our prep on our end is, you're speaking largely to kind of, the sales lead at these suppliers. Now you have an opportunity to speak to the CMOs and the CFOs and the COOs and kind of broaden your impact across the C-suite as you go into, these different funding pools and start to tap into CTV dollars, programmatic dollars. We're seeing the industry start to move to digital out of home. And that's a real opportunity to really understand the consumer and how these networks can drive not only new customers into their roles as a retailer, but ultimately grow the category and grow those brands and their impact in the marketplace.
I'm so glad that you hit on that national level, Justin, because that's that layer piece that I got so excited about at the beginning. So thinking about these brands are already driving media, but majority of the time they're using their first party data set, which is fantastic data, and they should start there. But that is a lot of times their most loyal customers, their most loyal consumers. So then what is that next layer out? Oftentimes that goes to third party. So that it could be a whole slew of different data signals coming in. So really utilizing that retail audience is what I get excited about, because they're already activating that media today, but how are they getting smarter with those audiences? We know that brands are losing loyalty. In a recent survey that we did, 52% of shoppers reported switching to a lower cost brand more often. So that's a significant risk, to a lot of brands out there. You think you have someone in, but obviously environmental pressures or whatever it may be, now they're switching to lower cost brands. So we know that retail media is the #1 tactic for retention. So it's easy for retailers to segment households by how often they're buying a category or even a brand, and then speak to them differently. And the new household growth on top of that is really the lifeblood of brands. And retail media also drives new households. So you have the retention on one side and then driving new households on the other. I know we did a study with thousands of on-site campaigns at Kroger, and over 75% of display impressions and clicks were from new to brand shoppers. So how are we driving that retention and driving new to brand? It's all utilizing those retail insights and understanding those signals to be able to communicate effectively.
I know we talked about measurement a little earlier, but what do you think are some of the challenges that still need to be navigated or approached related to measurement and standardization?
Yeah, I can just run with this one still. The IAB has largely settled the measurement and standardization issue. Now retailers just need to follow the guidance. Similar to what Justin was mentioning before, you have large retailers that have invested heavily in buying media organizations that can meet the expectations of big brands. So at Kroger, we have hundreds of people behind our retail media team: data scientists, data engineers, campaign operations, client service teams, a huge technology team. I'm probably forgetting someone, but they're all behind our platforms and our dashboards. And we meet or exceed the IAB measurement standards for retail media. Smaller retailers need to lean in and understand that expectation of the media companies. So if they want to invest in their media operations, they need to lean heavily on third-party aggregators rather than trying to position themselves as a full-fledged media company.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I completely agree with Jenny. The only thing I will add is that I think there will be nuances, which is the tough part about standardization as you look at different category specialists. So when you move outside of, let's say, drug and grocery into electronics or beauty or pet or sport, there are different nuances in terms of just kind of general merchandising and category specialists, which the IAB is very much on top of. And as Jenny said, I think they've kind of, I wouldn't say eliminated, but solved the standardization and kind of built the boat for everybody to jump on, and now everyone just has to kind of commit to it.
Yeah, jump on the boat. So are there any new technologies that you're keeping tabs on that could be game changers in the retail media space?
I'll start with this one. I think there are two main ones for me. I think it's funny. So I have been in the retail media space for the last 10 plus years. Previously, I was kind of the publicist side, and then went to pretty after they acquired a company called Logic. And so anyone who ends up listening and watching this remembers Logic. They were an ad network model that brought sponsored products together. I think that's coming back because we have so many networks, and once you get outside of the top 5 or 6 retail media networks who have best in class capabilities, you really need somebody to stitch it all together. So I'll go back to my comment before. money follows easy. And so you need one front door to get kind of the mid and long tail, right? So I'm really interested to see how that develops, and I think that's coming. I think the other piece for me is in-store has been fairly topical this year for the US. For those who are not familiar with Threefold, we're under our parent company, SMG, which we're based out of the UK. And the store, I would say, is easily 2 to 3 years ahead of us as a US market, where I would say on our side, domestically here in the US, we're probably staying 2 to 3 years ahead from a kind of an ad tech and programmatic perspective. But I think what we're starting to see is as people look at the store and build kind of digital screen capabilities and audio, the CMS layer to that, and how do you actually manage the content and make sure that that gets put out in an appropriate way. And if anyone's kind of familiar with some of the work that Andrew Litzman has done, he's talking about the store being a theater, right? And it's fully experiential, and we're seeing category specialists move into that. So to me, that's really exciting, because I think we're going to see over the next several years just the store format and the way that retailers think about displaying communication and including paid communication can change holistically.
I love that we have somewhat different answers here, because it just goes to show how wild this space is, and where we're seeing new technologies. Everyone seems to be talking about clean rooms. So I was like, oh, you're definitely going to talk about that, because it continues to pop up. But similar to what we were saying before, I think only some of the largest brands are really ready to activate with clean rooms. Everyone wants to, but you have to have a strong data team on the client side too, to be able to go there. The other area, we've still found that CTV is becoming more accessible for any brand. So we've seen that shift from linear, but precision audiences, segmented, derived from retailers, combined with that high quality TV experience, is still really powerful and driving opportunities for growth and innovation. So I think we're still continuing to see quite an acceleration there.
Jenny, sticking with you on the next question, how do you think about these new technologies and when to build, partner, or buy?
That's a great question. We apply a lot of different best-in-class partnerships, but we've taken most of our technology in-house. It allows us to move faster, guard our customer data, and really customize experiences for shoppers. So that's where we've tended to lean a little bit more in the past.
Yeah, and I love this question. I think a lot of retailers believe that they can build in-house and find out the hard way that they need to go back out to the market. And that there's very much like a fall off in terms of size, right? And so, Kroger and Jenny, you and the team have, I think, a different setup than maybe some of the other retailers do. And so that's where it's really interesting to see how the kind of the tech space has evolved even just the last 2 years, as the retailers have rightfully understood, hey, our first party data is incredibly valuable, and we can find ways to bring this into, and your terminology, Jenny, is kind of layering into the ecosystem.
Thank you. Yeah.
But I think that's really fascinating for me to watch, because I think it can be a distraction for retailers if they try to build everything in-house versus finding ways to partner with areas that they're not strong in. And so I think depending on who you are, you may take a different approach, but it's something that we watch all the time.
Now, I know Kroger has worked to trace the environmental impact of retailer media networks. Jenny, I'd love to get like an update on this, or any work that you guys have done.
Yes. I know when we first started talking about this, it was like, what do you mean environmental impact? Like we're talking digital media here. And then when you dig into it, really all digital activity burns carbon. So we started partnering with Scope 3 a year ago to measure the carbon impact of advertising on Kroger Precision Marketing in the programmatic space. And we've hit on this a couple of times, but really the key is to be more precise with those audiences. Untargeted approaches are wasteful. As I mentioned before, you're going to hit me with something for spicy food, I'm not going to convert. That's going to be wasteful. And then also you're burning carbon while doing that. So those precision audiences are really helping brands buy fewer, more relevant ad impressions. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about driving that effectiveness. In a benchmark study, we actually announced it in Cannes back in June. we found that using retail audiences in programmatic advertising resulted in a 37% lower carbon cost than the US benchmark. So that definitely makes me feel a little bit better getting up in the morning. We're talking about media, the digital ecosystem here, but also how are we doing better for the environment? So I love combining the two.
Great. Now, last formal question. What advice do you have for CPG brands in the retail media space? Specifically, I've been asked by CPG brand members of our community, how can a mid-sized company with limited budget that's new to retail media participate in this space?
Yeah, I think so. For me personally, I think take the fear of the budget or my size compared to some of the others out there. There's millions of challenger brands that we work with too. We work with brands of all sizes, and I think everyone should take a step back and say, what is the job to be done for that brand? Are you launching a new product? Do you need to grow category share? Are you defending against new competition? Are you looking to grow e-commerce sales? Like, what is that job to be done? Then look cross-functionally to understand how it's supported. So we talked a little bit about national dollars coming into the retail media ecosystem. Are those brands already being supported nationally? And do you have the right audiences that are threading through to some of those omni plans that you have a little bit closer to the retail shelf? So I think the most important thing I say to every brand is like, what is your job to be done? Then focus on the KPIs and the media plan will follow after that.
Simplify it more. It's like, don't try to be everywhere at once at all times. Like go learn, especially if you're a new brand coming into kind of spending in these retail media networks or a new retail media network. Learn one or two things at a time, understand the variables that drive that performance, to your point, Jenny, to whatever KPI and kind of utility that you need the media to deliver against. But try to take it off in chunks, versus trying to do it all at once, because at the end of the day, you won't learn much and you'll be frustrated and kind of have a false negative opinion of the campaign if you try to take it all on.
Absolutely.
Well, we're almost out of time. So to wrap us up, I'd love to play a quick fill in the blank rapid fire round with you both. That's okay?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
The biggest trend right now in retail media is?
Well, I'm going to say retail media is a channel and a layer.
Say it's similar, but just different way. It's programmatic and offsite extension, as we look to standardize.
The next big thing in retail media is?
Hyper-personalization.
Different answer, but similar: content and creative.
My biggest tip for brands activating in retail media is?
Again, don't get hung up on the term retail media. What is the job to be done?
Side of the basics.
In 5 years, retail media will?
Change incentives from cheap impressions to actionable business impact.
Be normalized across the industry just as media, and will be normalized on retailer earnings calls as a profit center.
Wonderful. Great responses. Big thank you to both of you for sharing your expertise with us today. For those of you watching, I hope to see everyone in the Chicagoland area for P2PI Live and Expo, November 12th through the 14th. And if you're watching across the pond, don't miss out on our Retail Media Summit UK event hosted in partnership with SMG on October 16th. You'll see Jenny again there. For the Path to Purchase Institute, I'm Cindy Loza. Thanks for tuning in.